Pope Francis has instantly gained the affection of the flock of followers of the Catholic Church, which numbers at 1.2 billion worldwide. He is called as the Pope of Hope at a time when the Church is confronted by so many issues. His commitment to Christ is defined by his concern for the poor. In a world where poverty thrives, Pope Francis might just be the leader we need to remind other world leaders of their duty to serve the welfare of the poor in their countries. And joining us tonight is a former priest of the SVD congregation, one who has fought for the welfare of the poor. He was former secretary of TESDA. He is former TESDA Director General Edicio Dela Torre. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, for an ex-priest who championed the cause of and you continue this advocacy, what is the impact of the election of Pope Francis I, since his life has been defined by his concern for the poor in Argentina? He has also fought government for its shortcomings in providing their needs. And with that in mind, what is the impact on other world leaders?
Well, the Pope, more than anything else, is really a symbolic leader. His capital, like all Christian icons, is symbolic more than bureaucratic. And I thought his first impact was his choice of name. To use Francis, referring to Francis of Assisi, means that he wants to deliver a message that he wants to care for the poor, but he also wants to renew the church. And little about his record in Argentina, I feel encouraged that he would speak clearly, take a stand for the poor, take a stand for justice. I think we should also be modest. Let's not try to make the Pope, overburden him with too many issues. I think his first messages are very good: to be humble, to be modest, to care for the poor. It reminds me a bit of what I like also about our own Cardinal Chito Tagle, who says the church should be a little bit more modest, speak out when it's necessary, but don't try to claim to know too much. Don't try to think that it's so powerful. The emphasis is on being trustworthy, on being credible. And I look forward to a very hopeful future if the Pope continues his initial messages and initial actions.
Theology was the trend of the times then in Argentina when he was a priest and bishop. Do you see its resurgence for the Catholic Church as a whole today?
Well, liberation means different things at different times. I think during our times, and maybe his times, it was framed within a very sharp contradiction between authoritarian regimes and even revolutionary radical movements. Now I think liberation is taking on many different forms. First of all, again, referring to Francis, I think there's much more concern now for environment, liberation from climate change and from environmental degradation. But I think speaking out, even in a democratic regime, for the poor on other issues, still continues to be a relevant part of any concept of theology and pastoral ministry.
And now moving forward, what reforms do you think will Pope Francis undertake to restore the faith of those who left the Catholic Church? And how important is evangelization?
I think he'll have to navigate a very careful path, because a lot of the controversies around the previous Pope and the Church as a whole has been in the field of sexuality. And even in the Philippines, that's a very divisive issue. I think he should concentrate on what could unite. And I think wherever you stand on sexual issues, reproductive health, and other very controversial issues, we could unite Catholics, Christians, on caring for the poor. That's the central gospel. It is not about sex. It's about having a preferential option for the poor. And I hope he will emphasize that, and then kind of be more charitable, be more understanding, not be so confrontational about other issues that divide Christians genuinely and rather deeply, as it has done in the Philippines.
Yeah, and so looking at poverty being such a big problem around the world, do you think that the Catholic Church will be more involved in reminding government of their duty to the people, especially those who are in the poor sector?
Yes, I think the Church should exist always as a voice for the voiceless, as a voice for the poor, but to be credible and not be seen as just politicking I think the church itself should show example. And I don't mean just in terms of charitable projects, being present with. So I like his symbolic acts of riding in a bus, just as our own Cardinal tagline, being present with the poor, listening to their voices, not presuming to speak for them always. I think that lending our voice to those who might not be listened to by government and those in power because they are weak and small, even if they're not organized, any church person, especially a pope who would speak clearly, gently, but firmly, would be of great service to the poor.
So what other issues do you think should be given attention by Pope Francis?
Well, I think since governments have been finding it very hard to negotiate decisive actions on climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, and luckily for us in the Philippines, there's a lot of consensus there. And many other poor countries, the poor are most vulnerable to the ravages of spikes in climate change, stronger typhoons, and things like that. I think that should be one. Besides, Francis, again, the name he has chosen. Francis is considered one of the first saints of the environment. He talks of brother sun, sister moon, care over the animals. So in addition to being for the poor, I think he should speak out more clearly, help build a consensus on the whole issue of climate change, addressing which will hit not just the poor, but rich and poor alike, but will hit the poor more.
And sir, personally, should priests be allowed to marry? And are you also in favor of women being ordained as priests?
Well, in that sense, I think I'm rather a maverick in the church. I believe that celibacy should really be an optional rule rather than a mandatory one. And that is not because I'm a former priest married. I still think logically it has never been forbidden for priests to marry. This was just a discipline imposed by the church against certain abuses. Women priests, I believe in that, but I am realistic. I don't think any pope is about to allow that. But okay. Yeah, men and women are created equal. Why shouldn't they have the same rights and responsibilities if they are willing to and ready? But institutions take much, much longer to change. And I don't think this present pope or maybe even the next one is about to change that kind of rule in the Catholic Church.
And sir, a final word from you, and now that we have a new pope?
Well, I don't usually pray too much, but in this case, I really offer a fervent prayer that he will be a voice, a fresh, even a modest voice, who will lend itself to the poor, the weak, and also to the broader issues of the fragility of our own planet Earth. So I hope you'll be there, serve as our inspiration, and we will do what we can from our end.
Okay, on that note, thank you very much for joining us tonight. That was former Secretary Ed Dela Torre of TESDA.